Hi, this is Dr. Tom Rafai, editor for News of the Day on behalf of the True Health Initiative. It is just, it's almost dreamlike for me to have this guest, Professor Barbara Rolls, because she is an absolute hero. And to have you on Noted, I just can't express enough thanks to you, Professor. Professor Barbara Rolls holds the Guthrie Chair in Nutrition at Penn State University. Has served on the advisory council for a branch of the NIH, National Institutes of Health, on multiple editorial boards of several academic journals, has published almost 300 papers, and has 3 phenomenal books, including The Ultimate Volumetrics Diet. The first book, of course, as you know, because Professor Rolls, for everyone, I want you to know she's never been anything but the most responsive. From my early days in clinical practice and learning about it and emailing her, I was shocked, to be honest. I said, I'll probably never get an email back. And she would always respond in terms of how to, at questions I would have in terms of managing a certain patient and so what have you. And right to today, here we are. Thank you so much for being on Noted, Professor.
My pleasure, Tom. And it's really great for me to have someone in the trenches with patients telling me so much about his own personal experiences with treatment and using the principles of volumetrics in your practice. It's really exciting.
And amazingly successful. I will say there is no single other principle that has been more effective to calm the fears of people feeling that they would need to go hungry in order to achieve their health goals. But before we start on that, if I may, what was your original passion for nutrition? What drove you to be interested in the first place?
Well, I didn't start in nutrition. I started it actually as an undergraduate in biology pre-med at the University of Pennsylvania. And I got the opportunity to get a scholarship to send me off to study in England at the University of Cambridge for a year. And I was young and I was supposed to come back to medical school, and I took a leave of absence. I was going to go to Cornell Med School, and I ended up staying and doing a PhD in physiology at the University of Cambridge, working on thirst, not hunger, not food intake, but I work on wet food now, so it's kind of related, you know. And then from there, gradually switched over to studying eating behavior. But part of my passion is that my mom had obesity, severe obesity, and growing up with that, she was a secret night eater, a binge eater, before we even knew what that was, and died way too young of complications from obesity. So I feel really passionately about it. And so once my work started getting into why people eat what they eat, which is really what I do, and what foods fill them up, translating it into practical advice just was something I'd always wanted to do. So really it's that history. Plus, I think I could easily put on quite a bit of weight without too much effort. You know, it's certainly in my genes. And so I would say I'm a careful, restrained eater.
Yeah, well, that in a sense, many of us, I guess, have come up with systems that we use to help others, but in primary, or at least certainly in a major sense, to help ourselves. It's wonderful for you to be open about that. You already know a little bit about, you know, my binge eating disorder and so forth. So I appreciate that, really. You did mention wet food, and since the audience that we tend to have on Noted is a lay audience, it's not necessarily, I'm sure there are scientists that watch, but a lot of people are just very intelligent, non-medical, non-scientists. And you said wet food. So I think, you know, maybe we can, we'll certainly get to that, everyone. I don't want you to wonder what that is. You will not.
That was my little tease, right?
Absolutely. There is certainly a major import in that. And if we can just start off with the idea that we discussed off air, that we're both, if I'm mistaken, please correct me, but we're both flexitarian, right? We have this concept that, sure, discipline and understanding, but no extremism. The concept doesn't make sense for most people. And so would not the concept of volumetrics and calorie density apply across any type of eating pattern. I mean, whatever you want to call it, whether it's ASEAN or Mediterranean or whatever, the principles are transcendent to that. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. I mean, you can apply the principles of calorie density, which we'll talk about in a minute, to any type of plan that you're following. Mediterranean, flexitarian are really very similar principles to volumetrics. Volumetrics is compatible with the dietary guidelines. I'm a nutrition professor, so obviously I like to emphasize the principles that we agree on in terms of nutrition. And try to consolidate around those and avoid extremism, because I don't think in the end it's sustainable.
Yes, to me, it's like living in a pressure cooker without a release valve. The concepts that we're talking about then, everyone, have to do with the fact that, and this may not be the complete part of it, because I do want to ask Dr. Rolls about maybe distinguishing between weight of food and volume in terms of its size, physical nature, in terms of size, not related to weight. But to make it simple, there is a lot to do when it comes to satiety that's feeling full, that has to do with the weight of the food. And weight basically runs anywhere from, you can do it in grams or pounds, but for people who might relate to pounds, so less than 100 calories per pound at spinach and lettuce to 4,000 calories per pound of butter and oils. Is that kind of the spectrum ends, Dr. Rolls?
Yeah, I don't think of it in pounds, because being a scientist, I think of calorie density as calories per gram. So, gram is just a little tiny bit of food, but the way you can think about it really is the calories that you pack into each bite of food.
Calories per bite.
When you think of it that way, the more calories you pack into each bite, the more likely you are to overeat. Because, and this was a big surprise in our research, people, whether they're little kids, preschool kids, across the age group, tend to eat a very consistent weight or volume of food over a day or two. The amount of food we eat is more consistent than the calories in the food. We don't really know what the calories are. So when we're sitting down to eat, we're judging what looks about right, what looks like what I'm used to eating. And as I say, we do these kinds of studies in 3 to 5 year old kids. They also tend to eat a very consistent weight of food across a day. So once you understand that we're really choosing our foods and the amounts to eat based on how it looks, the fullness of the plate, if you like, the amount of calories you pack into that food you have on your plate is going to affect how much you end up eating. And so that really was a big surprise. But then when you get into, well, what really packs the most calories into the foods? Fat has 9 calories per gram. Carbohydrate and protein 4, so less than half. Fiber 2 to 2.5, so fiber, because it's not fully digested, doesn't have as much. Alcohol comes in at 7, but alcohol is usually diluted with the real magic in our diets, which is water, which packs lots of weight and volume and no calories at all, and is actually the biggest proportion of the foods we most typically eat. Water is everywhere in the foods, except the really dry crackers, those sorts of things. But bread has lots of water, eggs, of course, fruits and vegetables are your really low calorie density, big volume foods that you can use to give yourself satisfying portions.
Well, at the danger, and I do not want to equate raisins to jelly beans. They clearly have different features in terms of health, but we can't necessarily, what you're saying is drink water with raisins and pray they turn back into grapes. The water has to be in the food, intrinsic to its microfibrous, or I guess microproteinaceous structure, whether we're talking about plants or animals, but the water has to be inside that food.
Yeah, for the full satisfaction of hunger. If you drink water, it's going to satisfy thirst mechanisms, and those are quite different. There are osmoreceptors, volume receptors in your heart and kidneys and blood vessels. Hunger is more about chewing and stomach fullness and all of the hunger hormones and insulin and glucose. So, and we've done a study where we had people drink water either as a beverage or made it a casserole into a soup, incorporating it in. And eating your water was much more effective in reducing subsequent food intake than drinking your water. And so really to get the biggest bang, you can't just drink the water along with other foods. You need to have water-rich foods. And of course, that then turns us towards the types of foods we should be eating more of anyway. Again, is your fruits, vegetables, whole grains absorb a lot of water when they're cooked. So really, if Volumetrics emphasizes the kinds of foods that you want to eat more of for health, but which you should be eating more of for satiety and avoiding hunger while you're managing calories.
It's a beautiful, beautiful irony. So water can get into food and provide it weight and fullness without calories, I guess, through roots in the ground, through cooking, and I guess that would be your legumes and your grains, preferably whole grains, but technically any grain would absorb water as you're cooking it, presuming it's not in Coca-Cola. You're cooking in water, we hope. And then I suppose biologically as well, foods have yogurts and obviously unfried foods and so forth would have water intrinsic to them as well. Is that basically the three ways that water gets into food?
Yeah, yeah. And one of the surprises I always like for people, even in our field, is to ask them, how do you think the calorie density of cheese and pretzels compares? Cheese obviously is high in fat, but it's wet, and pretzels are fat-free and dry. And actually, they turn out to have pretty much the same calorie density, depending on the cheese you pick, but they both come in around 4. So the water in the cheese dilutes down those the fat calorie density.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is surprising to a lot of people. You all ask an audience of dietitians, and most of them will think, oh, the cheese is going to have the higher calorie density. But it's got water. It's got a lot of water. So
relative to pretzels.
Yeah, not like pretzels. If you eat wet pretzels, I guess you could.
Oh.
When I say wet food, the wet food has to be palatable.
Yes, absolutely. I think what a great point that, in terms of pounds, some people think of it that way, but the truth is in science, it's grams, and it's really available on food labels. If you look at the food label, it's right there at the serving size in this beautiful little pair of parentheses that are sitting there, that there's this weight. There is the issue of dry food, but I've tended to find in general that if you triple the serving size of a dry legume or grain, it comes close to its final cooked weight. And this is not necessary to be ultra precise anyway. Is that a fair way of looking at it when you're looking at a label?
Yeah, I mean, you can calculate the calorie density. My lab has tried for years to try to get calorie density actually on our nutrition facts label. We're one of the few countries in the world that doesn't give calories per 100 grams, which would be basically calorie density. And we've always been told, oh no, people can't understand it. But people want to have those numbers, and they're on the label, but as you say, you just have to work to get to them. So
I am so sad to hear that that's their argument. I can say leading over 200 grocery shopping tours with hundreds of patients that is not correct. People definitely want the information, and anything I can do to help in that regard. Ironically, traveling to Europe, seeing that everything was standardized to 100 grams, making it equal apples to apples, no pun intended, I felt jealous, and it's sad to think that that's the case.
Well, they always give it both ways in Europe. So they'll give you the way we have it per serving it, but then they convert it to a standard 100 grams, which really helps. So supposing you're trying to choose between 2 snacks and you really are hungry, so you want the biggest volume for your calories, you look at the label. If you have it per 100 grams, you can immediately work out which is going to give you more food for your calories. So, and you know, the package sizes are never standardized. So
Right.
giving some way to ground it is really helpful to people.
Um, Certainly, and even just in grocery shopping tours, when we look at a large apple, for instance, and we look at the weight, and then we look at a large bag, a relatively large bag of potato chips that has some odd many multiple servings on it, and I say, notice the same weight. So if you're wondering why you can't just eat one, whatever that commercial says, there you go. In terms of some of the trials that have been done, for me, one that I've read and gotten fairly comfortable with is the Premier trial, which I thought was fantastic, because if I'm not mistaken, at least the way that I summarize it to people is that when you took a group of people, one of which was taught about standard portions and so forth, but in another group in which they were given free access, at least told that they could freely eat as much as they wanted of what I believe were the very low calorie density food options. They not only after, and I think it was a total of 1 year, is that correct?
That was actually a weight loss trial that we conducted. I
Right.
can tell you about Premier too, but we did a trial, yes, where we compared two groups. Neither group got specific calorie goals, but they were given dietary advice. And so the one group was told to watch all their portions and to eat less fat. And the other group was told to watch portions of calorie dense foods, but to eat more of low calorie dense foods, your fruits and vegetables. More positive messaging about what they could eat rather than what they shouldn't eat. And the group that got the positive messaging lowered the calorie density of their diets. They ate more fruits and vegetables, better diet quality, and lost significantly more weight over a year. And I like to emphasize the positive part of it. I think we've all heard so often, don't eat this, don't do that. So I think telling people what they can eat and how they can keep their favorite foods in their diets by tweaking them a bit, taking a bit of unnecessary unhealthy fats out and bulking up with your favorite fruits, veggies, spices, or herbs to give more flavor is a much more positive and sustainable way of thinking about eating.
Absolutely. Tell me I can't have something, I go right into deprivation psychology. And I've seen this happen with patients multiple times too. You tell them they can't have something and it just turns into a really bad result. That group also, as I understood it, was rated less hunger, not only lost more weight, was less hungry, and as I understand it, ate on average somewhere about a little under half a pound more food per day by terms of weight. So they were quite satiated, cut calories, were less hungry. What's not to like?
Right, and then we got a similar result. The Premier trial was the one you were talking about at first. That was a big multi-center trial testing out the DASH diet, which was intended originally for cardiovascular disease. They were testing it for weight loss and comparing the DASH to several other approaches, and didn't really see a big effect. But that was because people in all of the groups either increased or decreased the calorie density. Just giving people advice to do something doesn't mean they're going to end up doing it. So we came in after the fact. We took the data from the 700 plus people in that trial, just dumped the groups together and looked at their weight change and what they did over the first 6 months, which is when you get the biggest weight loss in these kinds of trials. And we divided them into 3 groups: those that didn't change the energy density at all, those in the middle, and those that had a big change in their calorie density. Sorry, energy density and calorie density, same thing. I switch back and forth. So the group that didn't change their calorie density lost the least amount of weight and actually ended up eating a pound less a day of food than the group that had the big change in calorie density. We lost significantly more weight. I think it was up to 13 pounds. It was really a big difference while eating a pound more food a day. Mm-hmm. So, it really is a win-win if you follow the principles. What I sometimes feel people hear though is, oh boy, I can eat more food. And they don't hear the message about, yeah, but it should be the ones low in calorie density, your fruits, vegetables, your water-rich foods, the whole grains, the kind of healthy, balanced diet that you should be eating.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, if that's not clear, let us all make it clear right now. The water has to be in the food. It gets you full on less calories. And in fact, if we were to look at pounds, at least for this learning moment, if somebody needs at least 3 and maybe up to 5 pounds of food per day, and that person's pretty consistent, whole fruit, for instance, which has been much maligned because of people thinking it's high in sugar, it's actually high in water, everyone, just high in water. Has about 250 calories per pound on average, even if you were to eat 4 pounds of, and mix it up, not just rely on bananas, which are still only around 400 calories per pound, but that's only 1,000 calories. Nobody is gaining weight and getting diabetes from eating whole fresh fruit. Is that a fair statement, Dr. Rose?
Gosh, has anybody tested that?
I don't know, just practical. I'm in my clinical practice, I've never seen anybody overdose on blueberries.
I think I do know some people that will sit and eat a dozen apples. Actually, when I was barely a toddler, I ate 11 bananas at once. So, that's one of the family stories of great lore, you know.
You bring up a great point in terms of the level of chewiness and where does calorie density apply as far as food goes from semi-solid to solid? I mean, clearly some foods are chewier than others. We bring up banana or maybe avocado, fruits that aren't necessarily as chewy as a piece of whole fruit, or yogurt, which is semi-solid. But where does that factor of solidity and level of chewiness, does it apply in any way, shape, or form to superimpose itself on calorie density?
Yeah, well, I think they both are factors that can affect how much we eat and how satisfied we are. Low calorie density foods often are chewy. They're, we recommend you eat your fruit whole, keep the skin on, that sort of thing. But there are a lot of other studies that are also looking at viscosity and chewing and eating rate on hunger and satiety. And they have beneficial effects. If you slow down eating, you chew more, you get more sensory satisfaction out of eating. That's going to help you to feel full. And it seems like the two factors should add together. We have really not many long-term clinical trials just looking at changes in texture, viscosity, and such. We're thinking there's food scientists here at Penn State that are interested in that kind of work. A lot of it goes on in the Netherlands. So it's the viscosity, texture, chewiness is definitely on radars. It's certainly on food companies' radars. How we can really leverage that maximally towards weight management, I think that'll get figured out.
And this might be a good time to maybe merge into some practical tips that people can use to help with their calorie management. But I wanted to also say before I ask the next question, that the American Institute for Cancer Research actually has a recommendation that average calorie density be at 1.25 or less for cancer risk reduction. I don't know if you are 1.25 per calories per gram or less for cancer risk reduction. Were you aware of that?
They have based their work on our first VOLUMETRICS book right from the get-go. I have worked with them over the years. Yeah. So when we developed the categories of foods, we have 4 categories of calorie density, very low, low, medium, and high. And the categories were really based around advice in relation to portion control. And so I work on effects of portion size on intake as well as effects of calorie density, and the two interact. So if you're eating very low calorie density foods, and those are your broth-based soups, your fruits and your non-starchy fruits and vegetables, there the advice is you pretty much can eat as much as you like. They're pretty well unlimited, as we were discussing. And then you start getting into the starchy fruits and vegetables and some of your mixed dishes, even some cooked pastas, you start exerting more portion control. And then you get into the mediums, your breads, and your more of the mixed dishes that we eat. They're managed portions. And then you get into the highest, which is we know what that is. That's things like chocolate and the dry crackers and cookies. And we would never say you can't eat them. I mean, that's not, you just, it's just, you just have to manage portions more than with the lower categories. But some of the foods that, and we get criticized for this, and people just, oh, this is another low-fat diet, and you're banning healthy fat foods like avocados and nuts, and that's not the point. I mean, those types of foods, even though they're higher in calorie density, are too good to pass up. It's just that you have to exert portion control more carefully. Nuts are really easy to overeat if you don't manage the portions in terms of calories, but they have, they're high in fiber, they have good fats in them. So, you know, it's trying to really be clear about this messaging, because volumetrics isn't just about fat reduction. The recommendations and guidelines now on dietary fat have actually gone up over recent years, and are really quite liberal in terms of, you know, up to 35% of your calories from healthy fats. And that's where the difference has emerged. It used to just be go as low fat as you can, avoid all fats, and then it really has done a 360 where it's you can eat fat in higher quantities, but make sure it's your healthy fats. But also do be aware that fats are high in calorie density, so they're going to pack more calories into each bite. And so they're going to mean that if you're managing calories, you need to watch the amounts more carefully.
I mean, to me, it's just like a budget. I mean, of course, if you went on vacation somewhere, you would probably spend more in those 7 days than at home, but it's your annual budget that matters. I think the message you made clear, and you're interviewed for the most recent issue of the Center for Science and the Public Interest Nutrition Action Health Letter, is that it really, for instance, in practical sense, if you're going to be increasing healthier fats, then increase your low starch vegetables and some of your lowest calorie density fruits. And on average, you will still end up in low calorie density, even if you're not technically low fat by version of less than 30% calories from fat. Yeah, to me, I guess maybe been following you for so long, it seems straightforward, but I can understand why there's trouble. On the other end, there have been some proponents that are saying things along the lines of don't eat anything over 700 calories per pound or anything like that. And I think we're clear here. No, it's the averages. There's nothing that's off the table. It's about more attention to things that pack more calories per bite and more freedom in terms of not having to be so precise about how much you eat, just to some degree, of things that have less calories per bite, which is largely driven by water. And obviously because of fat having less calories per bite, some degree, but it's more water-driven content than fat. Is that fair to say?
Oh, well, yeah, water has a bigger impact overall than fat on calorie density. We did a study looking at national data some years back, and we found that people eating a high-fat diet who were eating a lot of fruits and vegetables actually ended up with a lower calorie density than people eating a low-fat diet with very few fruits and vegetables. So it was really the water-rich fruits and vegetables that were winning. And I think a lot of my colleagues have not understood this. They don't look in their clinical trials at calorie density. They assume that it is the same as the fat content. And so they just don't even bother to try to look at it. Having said that, it isn't necessarily easy to, in a total diet, when you're looking at diet records, to calculate calorie density, because you don't always know where the water is. And that makes it how long you've cooked something. So you're working off of averages. And food frequencies don't give you accurate enough portions to really do it. So it's more complicated than I would like, but it still needs to be done in big clinical trials to see. I mean, as in the Premier, they didn't look at energy density, calorie density at first. Once you did that as a secondary analysis, you found that was the main driver of what was happening in terms of intake and weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
So I urge people who have data from big weight loss trials to go back and measure the calorie density and see if that was influencing the amount of weight loss.
Well, I won't lie. I asked Professor Christopher Gardner to do that, and I know you've already been in communication with him, and he had one request: can he get a signed copy of the Ultimate Volumetrics book from you? So yes, please go back to Diet Fits and do, because in my estimation, that study, if your people are not aware, you can just look up Diet Fits as one word, DIETFITS. Was really one in which people were encouraged to baseline whether they were put in the low fat or low carb group to eat more low calorie dense foods. And ironically, the charts, the charts of weight loss spectrum were exactly the same. And I suspect, though do not know, that there was a lot of equalization of calorie density, because once you increase fruits and vegetables, everything else tends to kind of be diluted out.
Well, Chris and I have talked many times about looking at calorie density in his trial, because he does have good intake data. It could be done. And we get that far, and then, well, who's going to do it and who has the money to pay for it? Because it will take somebody some time to do the work. So, you know, if anybody wants the data and wants to encourage us to do this, then we could probably figure it out if you want to fund it.
Yes, please, someone fund it. It walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, and we need the autopsy of the duck.
Yes.
Okay. Well, as we're winding down here, I have a couple final questions in terms of practical aspects. You have suggested, for instance, if you're going to a restaurant and you know you can't have your environment controlled like you could at home, and they'll probably put the bread basket in front of you and so forth, that there are ways to start a meal that might give you an advantage without making you feel starved by the time you leave. And one of those, while we all can think of a light dinner salad and so forth, is soup. And you've mentioned it a couple of times. Please explain to us, whether we know exactly why or not, but that while it is a liquid, soup is kind of a food you can drink. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and we've done lots of studies on soup and tried to figure out why it is so satiating, even though it is a liquid. And we compared the salt content. We did hot versus cold. We've compared it to other kinds of foods. And I think, because we don't really know, that, well, you get a lot of it for your calories. That's a given because it's so low in calorie density. I think some of it's cognitive. Our brains are telling us from our thousands of eating experiences how filling something is. And I mean, you grow up thinking soup is highly satisfying, right? It's probably a combination of all these things, though. It works pretty well even in little kids who probably don't realize how filling we have been taught that it is. So it's one of those mysteries. People need to do more. We've done clinical trials with it. People eating soup regularly every day lost significantly more weight than people eating the same number of calories as snack foods like crackers and chips. So yeah, but
it does work.
But we've also compared it to things that are the same calorie density, like melon, and the soup was more satiating than the melon.
Noted.
So, you know, it's just, there's something extra going on with it.
Mm-hmm.
And
but to be clear, when it comes to these kind of thin, non-viscous beverage calories, whether it be sugar-based pops or fruity drinks or alcoholic beverages, or I guess, creamed sugared coffees and teas and even juices, where clearly I certainly could drink 5 oranges worth of orange juice and still eat my waffles. But if you had me eating whole oranges, I'd probably think I was in an orange eating contest by the third one. It does not apply to beverage-based calories,
Yeah,
correct?
most beverages add on to the food calories. It depends. I mean, there's been some variability between studies, but beverage calories on the whole are less satisfying than food calories. And that's another one of the puzzles in this field of satiety research. So we still got plenty to do to figure this out. And believe me, food companies would like to know too, because they're very interested in satiety. They would like to give us foods that will fill us up. I hope in a healthy, nutritious way. The trouble is it's hard to reduce the calorie density of dry snacks. And just saying that you've ground up some vegetables and put them into a snack isn't really going to work so well for satiety. So
Too kind.
yeah, it's complicated for them.
Yes, yeah, it's you might have micronutrients in there, but as far as getting fullness calories, would you? And this is my request, not yours. You probably would resist, but I'm going to ask you. Could you please show us a picture of the Ultimate Volumetrics book?
Oh, sure, I have it conveniently next to me in case I needed to look something up. There's lots of tabs sticking out, but this
That
is
great.
that's the most recent of the books. So.
And it has everything you need to know.
It has everything, including all kinds of yummy recipes and great pictures and lots of practical. But it's actually a 12-week plan, which you don't have to follow, but it has a lot of practical tips about fitting exercise in along with diet and just telling you where to find fiber. And it's my 13-year-old granddaughter read it over the weekend, and she said that it was very interesting and she could understand it, and she loved the pictures, and she especially liked the side-by-side comparison. So there you go.
Well, I am already, my almost 6-year-old young girl Liliana, who's already reading like mad, who I've got interested in the concept of calorie density. When it comes in, which will probably be in the next couple of days, as you know, I've gone through the first volumetrics multiple times with tons of side notes, so I can't wait to get this. She's going to love the pictures, so I can't wait for that. So the final two.
The side-by-side pictures where it shows you how much more food if you just modify the recipe.
Same calories.
Just,
that's right.
Yeah.
So if you want to make your way to health without starving, please, you have to know this concept. So as we're winding up here, you've mentioned one thing, one of the two final topics. One, you mentioned exercise. So we're going to go back to personal. What does Professor Rolls do to stay physically active?
Oh my gosh. Well, as the weather's getting better, I'm killing myself with gardening right now, finding muscles I didn't know I had. My local daughter takes me out on hikes, which are very ambitious for someone my age. It's beautiful in central Pennsylvania. She has a thing about waterfalls, so we go where no human has ever tread before. And I actually got one of those little desk cycles that I keep when I'm watching TV. I can't sit still. So I have, in just a few months, done over 1,000 miles on that. And I keep weights everywhere in my house and, generally twitch around. And this afternoon, I'm going for a long walk with a friend, which is really probably the best thing, with the conversation. And now I'm vaccinated, I actually feel like life is coming back to something like normal.
Yes, yes. Our founder, Dr. David Katz, would be proud of you, as would Jack LaLanne. Now, in terms of our final question is, what is in the near future? What is, without giving away anything you obviously can't, what is coming down the pike from Team Rolls?
Well, we've been working a lot on what we call satiation rather than satiety. Satiety is what happens after you finish eating and how full you'll feel after eating and when you're going to eat next. There hasn't been as much work done on what actually happens during a meal and why people stop eating a particular meal. And one of my graduate students has developed an instrument, reasons individuals stop eating, and validated that, and testing that in a variety of situations. A lot of people are interested in collaborating with us on that in various clinical situations. So that's been really exciting. A lot of my work now is also in the preschool kids, the 3 to 5-year-olds, with the idea that really we need to try to change eating behavior at an early stage. So we have some studies that we have planned. Again, the focus is trying to get kids to eat more vegetables, which is like the ultimate challenge with them. But our lab, like many, has been shut for the past year. So we're hoping to try to test the waters and see if we can get started again. We have a lot of data, data we'd already collected that we're analyzing, but this has been a rough year for people studying eating behavior, you know.
Some of our eating behaviors, not included, have been challenged, to say the least. I will say, from the prerogative of the interviewer, with a 3 and a 5-year-old, if any of those studies are happening anywhere in Southeast Michigan, please let me know. I'd like to get my children enrolled in it. Professor, this has been an absolutely wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much for spreading your wisdom to the viewers and listeners of the News of the Day. I look forward to staying in touch. I wish you a wonderful day, and just can't thank you enough for the contribution you have given us all in the areas of nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolic health. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for talking to me about it. It's my passion.
And it's my pleasure. Take care.
Right.